$50 an acre. That's all it took. $50 an acre for a piece of land the richest family in town called worthless. They laughed when Walter Hadley signed that deed. They poured champagne in the back room of the courthouse. They told their friends at the country club about the fool who just handed over his life savings for a patch of cursed white dirt. But 6 months later, that same family was standing in a packed courthouse, watching their 100-year empire crumble in front of their eyes. And the man they had mocked, the 50-year-old widower with calloused hands and a faded flannel shirt, he wasn't laughing either. He was praying, because what Walter Hadley discovered beneath those 72 acres of so-called wasteland wasn't just worth millions. It wasn't just a fortune buried in the soil his grandfather had been cheated out of 60 years ago. It was something far more valuable. It was the answer to a promise he had made to his dying wife. A promise he carried for 8 long years. A promise that would change Cedar Hollow forever. Here's the story of how one humble farmer, $3,600, and a single forgotten letter brought the most powerful family in Montana to their knees. And what he did next will break your heart wide open. Stay with me. Cedar Hollow, Montana. A small town tucked into a valley where the Rocky Mountains begin to fade into rolling farmland, where the wheat fields turn gold in September, where everybody knows everybody's name, where everybody knows everybody's grandmother's name too, where secrets don't stay buried, except one secret, buried 60 years deep, under 72 acres of cracked white dirt that nobody wanted. But we'll get to that. First, you need to meet Walter Hadley. The sun hadn't fully risen over Cedar Hollow when Walter pulled his rusted Ford pickup into the cemetery parking lot. 5:45 in the morning. The grass still wet with dew, his breath fogging in the cold mountain air. He carried a small bouquet of yellow daisies in his right hand. Margaret's favorite. She had grown them in the front yard every summer for 22 years. Yellow daisies in a clay pot by the kitchen window. The smell of them on Sunday mornings while she made pancakes. The way she would hum Patsy Cline songs and brush the petals against her cheek before bringing them inside. Walter walked the gravel path slowly. He knew the way. He had walked it 312 times. 312 Sundays, 312 mornings of standing in front of a granite headstone that read, Margaret Rose Hadley, beloved wife and mother, 1969 to 2017. She had been 48 years old when the cancer took her. Walter was 50 now. She had been gone 8 years. But who was counting? He was. Every single morning. He knelt down in the wet grass, set the daisies against the headstone, brushed a fallen leaf away from the marble. Hey Maggie, he whispered. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods at the edge of the cemetery. I did it. I saved the last of it, $3,600, just like we talked about. He paused, swallowed hard. I'm going to do it today, sweetheart. Today's the day. I'm going to walk into that courthouse and ask about the foreclosed parcels. I'm going to find us a piece of land, even if it's just a few acres. Even if it's nothing more than weeds and rocks. His voice cracked. Because you promised me. Remember that night in the hospital? You said the Hadley name would mean something again in this town. You said it would. And I believe you, baby. I still believe you. A pause. A long one. I miss you so much it hurts to breathe sometimes. He stood up. Slow. Old knees creaking the way 50-year-old farmer knees creak when you have spent 30 years bent over rows of corn that did not belong to you. Walter Hadley was not a poor man because he was lazy. He was poor because Cedar Hollow was built on a system 3 generations old, a system named Ashford. The Ashfords owned Cedar Hollow, not officially. Officially, Mayor Tobias Buckman ran the town from his oak-paneled office on Main Street. Officially, the county council voted on every zoning ordinance and tax assessment. But unofficially, the Ashfords owned everything. They owned 80% of the arable farmland in the valley. They owned the bank. They owned the grain elevator. They owned the seed cooperative. They owned the lumber mill where Walter worked night security 4 nights a week. And they had owned the soul of this town for 3 generations. It started with Hollis Ashford back in 1934. He bought up land cheap during the Dust Bowl, foreclosed on neighbors who couldn't pay their mortgages, built a small fortune. His son Edmund Ashford expanded it in the 60s and 70s. And now Cornelius Ashford, 72 years old, ran the empire with the quiet ruthlessness of a man who had never once lost a deal. His son Trenton Ashford, 35, spoiled, cruel, wore tailored suits to the local diner, drove a black Range Rover with custom plates that read Ashford, the kind of man who tipped 20% at restaurants where everyone knew his name, the kind of man who fired waitresses who didn't smile wide enough, the kind of man who would soon make the biggest mistake of his entire life. Walter drove home from the cemetery in silence. No radio. He didn't like country music anymore. Margaret had loved country music. Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn, Tammy Wynette. The radio reminded him of her humming in the kitchen. He couldn't bear it, so he drove in silence, past the wheat fields his grandfather, Theodore Hadley, had once owned, past the barn where his father, Joseph Hadley, had taught him to milk a cow when he was 6 years old, past the white fence post at mile marker 7, where his father had finally broken down and cried after the bank took everything in 1985. Walter had been 10 years old that day. He remembered it, every detail of it, his father's face, the shame in his shoulders, the bank papers in his trembling hands. The Hadleys had farmed Cedar Hollow for 4 generations, and then in one signature it was gone. Joseph Hadley never recovered. He worked as a hired hand for the Ashfords until the day he died of a heart attack in 1992. Walter was 17 years old when he buried his father in the same cemetery where Margaret now rested. The shame had killed him. Walter knew that. Everyone in town knew that. The house Walter lived in wasn't much. A 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town, white paint peeling off the siding, a sagging front porch, a screen door that didn't close right, but it had a garden in the back where Margaret had grown her tomatoes, and a kitchen window where the morning light still came in, just like it did when she was alive. He climbed the porch steps, pulled out his key, opened the door. His phone rang. He smiled. He didn't even need to check who it was. It was Sunday morning at 7:15. It was always Delphine. "Hi, Daddy." "Hi, sweetheart." "You at the cemetery already?" "Just got home." "Did you tell Mom I love her?" "You know I did." Silence on the line. The good kind. The kind only daughters and fathers share. Delphine Hadley was 24 years old. She had her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She taught third grade at the elementary school in Riverton, the next town over, where she rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store. She drove home to Cedar Hollow every Sunday for dinner. Every single Sunday, even when the snow piled up to her hubcaps. Even when her old Honda's heater quit working. Even when she had a million papers to grade. She came home because her daddy was alone, and she would never let him eat Sunday dinner by himself. Not once. Not ever. Daddy? Yeah, baby. Are you doing it today? The thing you talked about? Walter swallowed. How'd you know? Because today's the 8th anniversary, and you said you'd do it on the 8th anniversary. You think I don't listen? He laughed. A small one. The kind that hurt his chest a little. You always listen, sweetheart. What time are you going to the courthouse? 9? I'll be praying. I know you will. A pause. Daddy? Yeah. Mom would be proud of you? Walter closed his eyes. Tight. So tight the world went black behind his eyelids. I'll see you for dinner tonight, baby. I love you, Daddy. Love you too? He hung up, sat on the porch for a long time, just breathed. Because the air in Cedar Hollow tasted different when you were about to walk into a fight you could not afford to lose. The Cedar Hollow County Courthouse was a 100-year-old brick building on the corner of Main and Jefferson. Marble floors, high ceilings, the smell of old paper and floor wax. Walter pushed open the heavy oak doors at 8:55. His boots echoed across the lobby. He felt out of place. He always felt out of place in places like this. His flannel shirt, his worn denim jacket, his hands too rough for paperwork. But he kept walking, because Margaret was watching. He believed that. He had to believe that. The county clerk's office was tucked behind a glass partition on the second floor. Behind the desk sat Ruth Coleman, 68 years old, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, a cardigan the color of soft lavender. Ruth had worked at the courthouse for 41 years. She had also been Margaret Hadley's best friend. The two of them had grown up together, been in each other's weddings, held each other's babies, cried at each other's mothers' funerals. When Margaret died, Ruth had stood by Walter at the graveside and held his hand so tight he thought his fingers would break. Walter Hadley, she said, now looking up from her paperwork. What in the good Lord's name brings you in here on a Monday morning? Need to ask about something, Ruth. Sit down, honey. He sat. She pushed her glasses up onto her nose. What can I help you with? Walter looked around, checked to make sure no one was nearby, leaned in a little. Ruth, I want to know about tax delinquent properties. Her eyes narrowed. Tax delinquent. Yes, ma'am. You're saving up to buy land? Trying to. How much you got? He hesitated. 3,600. Ruth Coleman stared at him for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes, and she smiled. A sad, knowing smile. Oh, Walter. I know it's not much. Honey, land in this valley goes for 10,000 an acre. I know that too. What were you thinking? A quarter acre, an eighth. Anything, Ruth. Anything with my name on the deed. Anything I can call ours. Anything Margaret would have wanted. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back, reached for a binder under her desk. Let me see what I can find for you, sweetheart. And that's when the trouble walked in. The door to the clerk's office opened With a sharp click, Trenton Ashford stepped inside. $3,000 suit, Italian shoes, hair slicked back like a Wall Street banker who had wandered into the wrong county. He carried a manila folder under one arm. He smelled like cologne and money and contempt. Ruth Coleman straightened immediately. Walter's spine went rigid, because in Cedar Hollow, when an Ashford walked into a room, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. It was just a fact of nature. Well, well, well. Trenton's voice was smooth, practiced, mocking. Look who's slumming it down at the courthouse this morning. Walter didn't turn around. Morning, Trenton? Mr. Ashford to you, Walter. Walter said nothing. Ruth's jaw clenched. Trenton walked closer, stopped right behind Walter's chair, looked over his shoulder at the binder open on Ruth's desk. Tax delinquent properties? Trenton said, reading upside down. Oh, this is rich. Mr. Ashford, Ruth said, her voice cold as January. Mr. Hadley is being helped right now. If you have business, please come back later. Oh, I have business, Ruth. Plenty of business. But this is just too good to walk away from. He grinned. Walter, tell me. How much you got saved up? Walter said nothing. Come on, neighbor. We're all friends here. How much? $3,600. Trenton laughed, loud. A laugh that filled the marble hallway and echoed off the high ceiling and made Ruth Coleman wince. $3,600. That's right. For land. That's right. Trenton wiped at his eye like he was wiping away a tear of mirth. Walter, buddy, that's adorable. That's just precious. You know what $3,600 buys in Cedar Hollow? I have a feeling you're going to tell me. A used riding mower? A small bass boat? A weekend in Las Vegas if you're frugal. Walter's knuckles went white on the arm of the chair, but he didn't speak. Ruth Coleman did. Mr. Ashford, with all due respect, please leave. With all due respect, Ruth, I think I'm going to stay. He pulled out a chair, sat down, crossed his legs, smiled. In fact, I want to make Walter here an offer. Ruth went still. Walter turned slowly, looked at Trenton for the first time. What kind of offer? Trenton opened his manila folder, pulled out a piece of paper, slid it across the desk. Bone Hollow, he said. The words hit the room like a stone dropped in a still pond. Bone Hollow. Ruth Coleman went pale, because every single soul in Cedar Hollow knew about Bone Hollow. It was the dead patch, the cursed acres. The 72 acres at the eastern edge of the valley where the lush green farmland abruptly ended and a blinding white expanse of cracked alkaline crust began. Nothing grew there. Not corn, not wheat, not even weeds. The local children dared each other to walk across it at night. Most wouldn't. A drifter had disappeared out there in 1958. They never found his body. The Ashfords had owned Bone Hollow for decades, paid the property taxes every year, never tried to do anything with it, until now. Bone Hollow, Walter repeated. 72 acres. What's the catch? No catch. Pure and simple. I sell, you buy. How much? $3,600. Ruth Coleman gasped audibly. The math hit Walter like a slap. $50 an acre. $50 an acre for land that should have cost $500,000. His stomach turned, because nothing in Cedar Hollow was ever free, and nothing involving an Ashford was ever simple. Why, Walter said. Why what? Why would you sell me Bone Hollow? Trenton leaned back in his chair, stretched his arms above his head, sighed contentedly. Walter? Buddy? Pal? I've watched you for years. I've watched you bust your tail working a tenant lease on my family's land. I've watched you save up your little nickels and dimes. And I've thought to myself, you know what? The man deserves a piece of property. He really does. You're lying? I'm being generous. You're being cruel? Trenton's smile widened. Tomato. Tomato. Walter looked down at the paper. The legal description was right there. Tract 88, Eastern Sector, Cedar Hollow Township. 72 acres of nothing. 72 acres of cracked white earth that nothing had grown on for 60 years. He could already hear the laughter. He could already hear Silas Doyle at the diner. He could already hear every farmer in Cedar Hollow whispering at the post office. Walter Hadley spent his life savings on the devil's land. His father's name, Margaret's promise, his daughter's pride, all of it, spent on dust. What do you say, Walter? Why are you really doing this, Trenton? Because I can. The words landed flat, 3 syllables. But they meant everything. Because I can. Because the Ashfords had always been able to do whatever they wanted to people like Walter Hadley. Because 80% of the valley was theirs. Because Walter's father had died working their fields. Because every poor farmer in Cedar Hollow knew that when an Ashford smiled at you, it was about to cost you something you could not afford to lose. Walter stood up. His knees popped. I need to think about it. You've got till noon? Noon. That's right. After noon the offer expires. Standard contract. Cash on the desk. Deed in your hand. We can do this clean. Why the rush, Trenton? Because I have lunch reservations at the country club at 12:15, Walter. And I'd hate to be late. He stood up, adjusted his cufflinks, smiled one more time. Don't disappoint me, neighbor. He walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Walter had ever heard. Ruth Coleman put both hands flat on the desk, closed her eyes, breathed slowly. Walter. I know. Walter Hadley, don't you dare. Ruth, don't you dare give that man 1 penny. Walter sat back down, slowly, looked at the contract Trenton had left on the desk. What do you know about Bone Hollow that I don't? Ruth. She looked at him for a long time, a very long time. And then she said the strangest thing. I don't know anything, sweetheart. But your daddy did. Walter froze. What did you say? Your daddy? Joseph Hadley. He came in here in 1989. I remember it like it was yesterday. He asked me to pull the land records on Bone Hollow. He stayed in the archive room for 3 hours. When he came out, his face was white as a sheet. What did he find? He never told me. Ruth. Walter, I swear on Margaret's grave. He never told me. She paused, took off her glasses, wiped them on her cardigan, but he said one thing, right before he left. He said, Ruth, if anyone in my family ever asks about Bone Hollow, you tell them to talk to Pastor Brennan. Walter blinked. Pastor Brennan? That's what he said. Walter Hadley left the courthouse at 9:45 in the morning. He had 2 hours and 15 minutes until Trenton Ashford's offer expired. He didn't go home. He didn't go to the bank. He drove straight to First Methodist Church on Sycamore Avenue. Pastor Elijah Brennan was 75 years old. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a slight stoop from 40 years of leaning over hospital beds and gravesites and the bowed heads of weeping parishioners. He was sweeping the front steps of the church when Walter's pickup pulled into the gravel lot. He looked up. He saw Walter's face. He knew. Somehow, he just knew. "Come inside, son." "Pastor, come inside." Walter followed him into the sanctuary. The wooden pews, the stained glass windows that threw colored light across the red carpet, the smell of old hymnals and candle wax. Pastor Brennan sat down in the third pew, patted the seat next to him. Walter sat. "I've been waiting for this day, Walter." "What?" 33 years. I've been waiting." Walter stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Pastor Brennan reached into the inside pocket of his black suit jacket, pulled out an envelope, yellow with age, edges soft from years of being held, sealed with red wax. The wax stamp had the letter H pressed into it. H for Hadley. "Your father gave me this in November of 1991. Pastor Brennan said quietly. 3 months before his heart attack. He told me to keep it safe. He told me to give it to you only if you ever came to me asking about Bone Hollow. He told me not to mention it until then. He said if you never asked, then to bury it with him." Walter's hands were shaking. He couldn't speak. He knew Walter. Knew what? "I don't know. I never opened it. I just kept my promise." Pastor Brennan placed the envelope in Walter's lap, closed his old wrinkled hands over Walter's. "Take it home, son. Read it alone. Whatever your father needed you to know. It's been waiting 33 years to reach you." Walter drove home in a daze, the envelope on the passenger seat of his pickup. Yellow, soft, sealed with wax. 33 years. His father had written him a letter 33 years ago, and Pastor Brennan had kept it locked away in the church safe all this time. Walter parked in the driveway, killed the engine, sat there for a full minute, hands on the wheel, heart pounding. Then he picked up the envelope, walked inside, sat at the kitchen table where Margaret used to drink her coffee, and he broke the wax seal. The letter was written in his father's hand. Walter recognized the cramped handwriting immediately. The way Joseph Hadley always pressed too hard with the pen. The way his W's always looked like V's. The way every page felt like it was carved into the paper instead of written. "My son, if you are reading this, you have come to Pastor Brennan asking about Bone Hollow. That means you are old enough now to be making decisions for our family. That means I am gone. I want you to know that I love you. I want you to know that the night I lost our farm to the Ashford bank was the worst night of my life. I want you to know that I never stopped trying to find a way to get our land back. I never stopped trying. But I want you to know something else too. In 1989, I came across some old papers in the courthouse basement, records from 1962, the year the Ashfords first took ownership of the Bone Hollow tract, the year your grandfather Theodore was forced to sell it to Hollis Ashford for next to nothing. There was a survey attached to those records, a geological survey commissioned by your grandfather Theodore in 1959. He paid a man from Bozeman to come out and test the soil. That survey is missing from the courthouse now, Walter. I went back to look for it last month, and it was gone. Someone removed it, but I read it before it vanished. I read it twice, and I am writing this letter to tell you what your grandfather wrote in the margin of that survey in his own handwriting. He wrote, "There is something beneath the white dirt, something the Ashfords must not be allowed to find." I do not know what he meant. I tried to figure it out for 2 years, and I could not. But I am leaving you this warning, my son. Bone Hollow is not what it appears to be. The Ashfords have owned it for 60 years, and they have done nothing with it. Why? Why would they hold onto worthless land for 60 years? Because they are waiting. For what I do not know, if they ever try to sell that land back to you, you must buy it. You must? Whatever it costs. Because your grandfather knew something, and our family is owed something. I love you, son. Tell your mother I am sorry I could not save the farm. Your father, Joseph Hadley. November 4th, 1991. Walter set the letter down on the table. His hands were trembling so hard he could barely hold them still. He sat there for 10 minutes, maybe 20. He didn't move. He couldn't. Because his father had known. His grandfather had known. 3 generations of Hadleys had been circling the same secret without ever quite reaching it. And now Trenton Ashford was offering to sell him Bone Hollow for $3,600 because he thought it was a cruel joke, because he thought Walter Hadley was a fool, because he didn't know what his great-grandfather Hollis had hidden in a vault somewhere, because somewhere along the way the Ashford family had forgotten their own secret. Walter stood up, walked to the kitchen window, looked out at Margaret's tomato garden, now overgrown with weeds. He whispered her name, just once, soft. Maggie. The wind chimes on the porch tinkled. He chose to believe that was her answer. He picked up the phone, dialed Delphine. Hi, Daddy? Sweetheart. What is it? You sound funny. I need to ask you something. Okay, if I told you I was about to do something crazy, something everyone in town is going to laugh at me for, something that might cost me every penny I have, what would you say? There was a long pause on the line. A very long pause. Daddy? Yeah. Mom told me something. Right before she died. She said, Delphine, your father is the most stubborn man I have ever met. And one day, he is going to do something that no one understands. And when that day comes, you stand by him. No matter what. Walter's eyes filled with tears. She said that. Delphine. Whatever it is, Daddy, I trust you. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, whispered, I love you, baby. I love you too, Daddy. Go do whatever you need to do. Walter Hadley walked into the Cedar Hollow County courthouse at 11:52 in the morning. He carried a brown paper grocery sack. Inside the sack was $3,600 in cash, 10s and 20s and 50s. 8 years of saved nickels. 8 years of double shifts. 8 years of skipped lunches and patched up boots and 1 pair of jeans for working and 1 pair for church. He walked up the marble steps, down the long hallway, to the 2nd floor, to the county clerk's office. Trenton Ashford was already there, sitting across from Ruth Coleman's desk, sipping a coffee from the cafe across the street. A standard fee simple deed laid out in front of him. The man's lawyer wasn't with him. The man's lawyer was at the country club already, because Trenton Ashford didn't think this transaction needed a lawyer, because Trenton Ashford thought he was about to humiliate a 50-year-old widower in front of the whole town, because Trenton Ashford was arrogant. And arrogance, dear listener, arrogance is the loudest prelude to a man's own downfall. Walter, Trenton said, I'd given up on you. I'm here. Cutting it close. I'm here. Trenton smiled. You bring the money. Walter set the paper sack on the desk. Trenton peeked inside. His smile grew. Oh, this is precious. Cash in a grocery bag. I love it. I love everything about this. Just give me the deed, Trenton. Easy, easy. Let's count it first. Ruth Coleman watched from her chair, silent, her hands folded on the desk. She knew her role. She had been at this desk for 41 years, and she knew exactly how a standard land transaction worked in Cedar Hollow County. She knew the standard fee simple deed form, the same one she pulled out for every routine sale. The one that conveyed all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights to the grantee. She also knew that a careful man would not use that form for a real estate transaction with hidden potential. A careful man would bring a lawyer. A careful man would request a custom contract. A careful man would sever the mineral rights from the surface rights. But Trenton Ashford was not a careful man. Trenton Ashford was an arrogant man. And he didn't bring a lawyer, because he thought this was a joke. Ruth, Trenton said, pull a standard deed. Let's get this thing notarized and signed. Of course, Mr. Ashford. She reached into her file cabinet, pulled out a single sheet of paper, the same form the county had used for every routine land transfer for the last 40 years. She slid it across the desk. Trenton glanced at it, didn't read it. He just wanted to be done. He wanted to get to his country club lunch. He wanted to laugh about this story with his friends over cocktails. He signed his name with a flourish. Your turn, Walter. Walter picked up the pen. His hand was steady. For the first time in 8 years, his hand was steady. He read every single line of the deed, top to bottom. His eyes paused on one specific clause. He read it twice. He read it 3 times. His heart began to pound, because there it was, right there in black and white. Conveys all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights to the grantee. Walter signed his name, Walter Joseph Hadley, in honor of his father. He set the pen down. Ruth Coleman stamped the notary seal. She slid the deed across the desk. Trenton picked up the grocery bag of cash. Pleasure doing business, neighbor. Goodbye, Trenton. Have fun out there in the dirt. He left, whistling. He never read the contract. Walter Hadley stood in the marble hallway of the Cedar Hollow County Courthouse with a deed in his hand. A deed that said his name, a deed for 72 acres of land at the eastern edge of the valley, a deed his grandfather had wanted him to have, a deed his father had wanted him to have, a deed Margaret had whispered about in her last days. Ruth Coleman walked out of the clerk's office, stood next to him, put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just held him there. For a long moment. Just held him. The way only an old friend can. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the news had spread through Cedar Hollow like a brush fire in August. The diner on Main Street, the hardware store, the barber shop, the feed and seed. Did you hear what Walter Hadley did? He bought Bone Hollow. He bought Bone Hollow. He bought Bone Hollow for $3,600. Cash. Lord have mercy. That man has lost his everlasting mind. Silas Doyle heard it at the diner. Silas was Walter's oldest friend, 51 years old, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart of pure gold. He had been Walter's best man at the wedding. He had carried Margaret's coffin at the funeral. He was eating a tuna melt when Wanda the waitress slid into the booth across from him. Silas, you heard about Walter? Heard what? He bought Bone Hollow this morning. Cash. $3,600. Silas dropped his fork. He what? Bought Bone Hollow. From who? Trenton Ashford. Silas stood up so fast he knocked over his coffee, threw a 10 on the table, was out the door before Wanda could say another word. He found Walter sitting on his back porch at 3:15. Walter had a glass of sweet tea in his hand. He was looking out at Margaret's overgrown tomato garden. Silas slammed the screen door open. Walter Hadley. "Hey, Silas. What in the holy name of everything good did you just do?" "Sit down, Silas." "Don't tell me to sit down. I will not sit down. I will stand right here and yell at you." "Sit down." Silas sat down, hard, on the porch swing. It creaked under his weight. He stared at Walter for a long time. Walter sipped his tea. "You want to explain to me why you just gave Trent and Ashford every penny you have for a patch of dirt that hasn't grown a single blade of grass since Eisenhower was president?" "Not really." "Walter." "Silas?" "Look at me." Walter looked. Silas's eyes were full of something Walter hadn't seen in years. Fear. The kind of fear only a best friend feels. "Buddy, tell me you didn't just throw away Margaret's memory on Ashford's joke. Tell me there's something more to this." Walter set down his tea, looked at his oldest friend, and he said softly, "There's something more to this, Silas. I can't tell you what, not yet. But you've known me 30 years, so I'm asking you, trust me." Silas stared at him for a long time, a very long time. Then he reached across the porch and clapped a calloused hand on Walter's shoulder. "Okay, brother, I trust you." He stood up, walked to the screen door, turned back. "But if you ever need me, for anything, you call me? You hear, I hear you, Silas? Day or night? Day or night?" The screen door slammed. Silas Doyle was gone. Delphine arrived at 6:30 for Sunday dinner. She brought a casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel. Green bean casserole, her mother's recipe. She kicked off her shoes by the door, padded into the kitchen in her socks, set the casserole on the counter. Then she saw the deed, sitting on the kitchen table, right next to her father's reading glasses. She picked it up, read it again, set it back down, walked to the window, stared out at the garden. Walter watched her from the doorway. She didn't turn around. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Is this the crazy thing you called me about?" "Yeah, baby." She turned slowly. Her brown eyes were wet. But she wasn't crying. She was smiling. A small, soft, stubborn smile. The exact smile her mother used to give. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "You bought Bone Hollow." "I did." "Everyone is going to laugh at you." "They already are." "They're going to say you're a fool." "They already are." She walked across the kitchen, wrapped her arms around her father's neck, held him tight, whispered into his shoulder, "You're the bravest man I know, Daddy." Walter held his daughter, and for the first time in 8 years, he cried, right there in his kitchen. He let himself cry that evening. After Delphine had gone back to Riverton, after the dishes were washed, after the sun was setting low and gold over the valley, Walter Hadley got in his pickup truck and drove east, past the wheat fields, past the cattle ranches, past the last paved road, down a gravel lane that hadn't seen traffic in years, until the world abruptly changed. The green farmland ended. A blinding white expanse of cracked alkaline crust began. Bone Hollow, 72 acres of dead earth. He parked the truck, walked out into the white dirt. The crust crunched under his boots like glass. The sun was sinking now, the light reflecting off the white earth turning gold and amber and rose. He walked to the center of the field, stood there. The wind whispered across the limestone ridges. He pulled his father's letter out of his pocket, held it up, read the last line aloud. "And our family is owed something." He folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, knelt down, picked up a handful of the dry white earth, let it run through his fingers. "Granddaddy," he whispered, "I'm here. I made it. Whatever you buried out here, whatever you knew, I'm gonna find it." The wind rose. The white dust danced around his boots. He chose to believe his grandfather, Theodore Hadley, was watching. He chose to believe Margaret was watching. He chose to believe his father Joseph was watching. He stood up, looked out across the dead white earth, and for the first time in his 50 years of life. Walter Hadley was a landowner. The Hadley name was on a deed in Cedar Hollow, Montana. The wind whispered, the earth crunched, and somewhere far below his boots, 60 years deep, a secret began to stir. The first 3 weeks were a nightmare. Walter Hadley woke up before sunrise every single morning. He drove his rusted Ford pickup out to Bone Hollow. He stepped out into the white dust, and he tried to make something grow. Anything at all. He tried drought-resistant clover. He tried alfalfa. He tried prairie grass. He tried the salt-tolerant seed mix the Agricultural Extension Office in Helena had recommended over the phone. Everything died. Within 48 hours, the seeds wouldn't even sprout in the alkaline crust. The few that did pushed pale green shoots up toward the sun. And then they curled, and browned, and withered, and blew away on the morning wind. By the end of the 3rd week, Walter had spent $420 on seed. He had a yield of zero. The town watched. Oh, how the town watched. Trenton Ashford drove his Range Rover past Bone Hollow at least 3 times a week, slowed down, rolled down his tinted window, pretended to inspect the surrounding ridges, smiled to himself. He never spoke to Walter. He didn't need to. The presence was enough. The slow predatory crawl of a black SUV at the edge of the property, like a vulture circling a wounded animal. The local farmers laughed openly at the feed store. "Did you see Walter out there yesterday?" "Saw him, planting wheat on Bone Hollow?" "That man has lost his mind. Margaret would be rolling in her grave. Now don't you bring Margaret into this, she'd have stopped him." "Would she?" "She would have." A pause. "I miss Margaret. We all miss Margaret." Delphine drove home every Sunday. She brought casseroles. She brought pies. She brought small bags of soil amendments from the gardening store in Riverton. She did not laugh. She did not question. She sat on the porch with her father in the evenings and held his hand while the sun went down over the dead white acres. One Sunday, while she was washing the dinner dishes, Delphine pulled her engagement ring off her finger. She had been engaged, briefly, a year ago. The relationship had ended. The ring had stayed in a velvet box in her dresser drawer. She drove to a pawn shop in Bozeman on Monday morning. She sold the ring for $940. She did not tell her father. She just deposited the cash into his account on Tuesday with a note that said, "For seed money, love you forever." D. Walter saw the deposit on Wednesday. He sat in his kitchen. He put his face in his hands, and he wept like he had not wept since the day Margaret died. But Walter Hadley was not stupid. He was many things. Stubborn, grieving, proud, lonely. But he was not stupid. He was a 50-year-old farmer. And a 50-year-old farmer knows soil, the way a 50-year-old mother knows her own child. He knew this dirt was not just bad. He knew this dirt was wrong. So on a Tuesday morning in the 4th week, Walter drove home from Bone Hollow with 3 small mason jars in the passenger seat. One filled with the chalky white surface crust, one filled with the heavy grey sludge he had dug up from 4 feet down, one filled with the strange brownish red water that had seeped into the borehole after he drilled past 5 feet. The water smelled like rust and old pennies. It left a shimmering film on his gloves. It was not groundwater. It was not anything he had ever seen in 25 years of farming. Walter could have taken those samples to the County Agricultural Extension Office, but the County Agricultural Extension Office was funded in part by the Ashford Foundation. He could have taken them to the state lab in Helena, but the state lab in Helena was 3 hours away, and his pickup truck was burning oil, and he could not afford the gasoline. So he did something different. He sat down at the public computer at the Cedar Hollow Public Library. He searched for independent geological testing facilities. He found one 320 miles south, in Fort Collins, Colorado. The Vance Institute for Applied Geochemistry, affiliated with Colorado State University, lead researcher, Dr. Eleanor Vance. Walter typed out a careful email. He explained who he was, what he had found, what he wanted tested. He hit send. He waited. 3 days passed. Nothing. 5 days passed. Nothing. On the 7th day, Walter checked his email at 6 in the morning, out of habit, expecting nothing. There was a reply. The reply was 4 sentences long. It said, "Mr. Hadley, I have received your inquiry. Please do not send any samples by post. Please do not discuss this with anyone. I will be in Cedar Hollow on Thursday at 6 a.m. Have coffee ready." It was signed, E. Vance. Walter stared at his computer screen. He read the email 4 times. His stomach was a knot, because no scientist drives 300 miles to a stranger's farm for a soil sample. Not unless something is very, very wrong, or something is very, very right. Dr. Eleanor Vance arrived at 5:47 on Thursday morning. She drove a gray Subaru with a cracked windshield and a State University parking decal. She was 55 years old, salt and pepper hair cut short and practical, no makeup, wire-rimmed glasses, a canvas field jacket, hiking boots that had seen real mountains. She stepped out of her car, looked at Walter standing on the porch in his flannel, walked up the steps, shook his hand. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were tired. But behind the tiredness, there was something else. Excitement. The kind of excitement a scientist gets exactly once in a career. She did not say good morning. She did not say nice to meet you. She said, "Where are the samples?" "In the kitchen." "Show me." Walter led her inside. She did not take off her boots. She walked straight to the kitchen table. The 3 mason jars were lined up in a neat row. She picked up the brownish red water first, held it up to the morning light coming through the window, watched it. For a full 30 seconds, she did not breathe, or if she did, Walter could not hear it. Then she set the jar down, very, very carefully. She turned to him. Her face was pale. "Mr. Hadley." "Walter, please." "Walter, I need you to sit down." He sat down. She sat across from him. She placed both hands flat on the kitchen table. "I need to tell you what you have, Walter." "Okay. And before I tell you, I need you to promise me something." "What?" that you will not tell another living soul about this until I have made some phone calls. Not your daughter, not your best friend, not your pastor, not anyone. Why? Because what you have buried under those 72 acres is going to change your life. And if the wrong people find out before you have a lawyer, they will take it from you. Walter swallowed. Dr. Vance? Eleanor. Eleanor, just tell me. She took a deep breath. Walter, the white crust on the surface is alkaline, just like everyone said. But it is not just any alkaline crust. It is a precipitate formed by the slow evaporation of a unique mineral brine over thousands of years. The water that seeped up from below, through cracks in the limestone, left behind a chemical signature that I have only seen in 2 places on Earth. Where? Inner Mongolia and a closed government research site in California. Walter's throat closed. What does that mean? It means, Walter, that under your 72 acres of dead Earth, you have a deposit of rare earth elements. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, yttrium, concentrated in a way that I have never personally measured outside of a research lab. Rare earth? Yes. What does that mean for me? She paused. She removed her glasses. She rubbed her eyes. She put her glasses back on. It means, Walter, that you are sitting on top of approximately $30 million in raw material value. Conservative estimate. The kitchen went silent. Walter could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The morning light moving slow across the linoleum floor. Eleanor. Yes. You drove 320 miles to tell me I have $30 million in dirt. Yes. Are you sure? I ran the samples 3 times in my own lab. Then I called a colleague at the Colorado School of Mines. I sent her duplicates without telling her where they came from. She ran them independently. She called me back at 2 in the morning. And she asked me where I had stolen them from. Because deposits like this, in the United States, at this purity, do not exist in any geological database. Walter could not feel his hands. He looked down at them. They were still attached to his arms. They were resting on the kitchen table. They were trembling. He just could not feel them. She kept talking, slowly, carefully, the way you talk to a man who has just been told something his nervous system cannot process. Rare earth elements are critical materials, Walter. They are used in everything from electric vehicle motors to wind turbine magnets to smartphones to defense systems. Right now, the vast majority of the global supply comes from overseas. The United States Department of Defense considers rare earth supply chains a matter of national security. National security? Yes. Why? Because if that supply gets cut off, we lose the ability to manufacture missile guidance systems, stealth aircraft, submarines, you name it. And I have. You have. A domestic, American, privately owned, Tier 1, rare earth deposit, sitting under 72 acres of land you bought for $3,600. Walter put his head down on the kitchen table. He breathed. For a long time. Eleanor Vance did not rush him. She just sat there, in Margaret's old chair, watching the morning light move across the linoleum floor. After a while, she spoke again. Walter? Yeah. There's something I have to tell you. About me. He looked up. My husband died 10 years ago? I'm sorry. Car accident on I-25. Drunk driver. He was 46 years old. Eleanor, I don't tell you this for sympathy, Walter. I tell you this because I want you to understand. I know what it is to lose someone you love. I know what it is to wake up alone for 10 years. I know what it is to keep promises to a dead person. She paused. And I'm telling you that I am going to help you all the way, because nobody helped me when my husband died, and because something tells me you have been keeping a promise to somebody for a long time. Walter could not speak. He just nodded. Once, slow. She stood up, pulled a card out of her pocket, set it on the table. That is my private cell, not the office line. You call me? Anytime. Day or night. We need to move fast, Walter. The longer this stays a secret, the safer you are. What do I do next? You play the fool. You go back out to that field every morning. You plant your useless seeds. You let the town keep laughing. You do not tell anybody, not even your daughter. Not yet. She paused at the door. And Walter. Yes. I am going to call a friend in Seattle, a company called Apex Strategic Minerals. They are the only American firm with the capacity to extract and refine rare earths at industrial scale. They will send a lawyer. Her name is Vivian Cross. She is the best in the country at what she does. Okay? You trust no one until she gets here. Okay. The screen door closed behind her. The Subaru pulled away. Walter sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. He did not move. He just sat there, and he stared at the 3 mason jars. And he wondered if any of this was real. For the next 6 weeks, Walter Hadley played the fool. He drove out to Bone Hollow every morning at sunrise. He walked the rows of dead earth. He scattered worthless seed. He dug useless irrigation trenches with a shovel he could barely afford to replace the handle on. The town laughed. The town kept laughing. The Ashford family kept driving past. And every evening, after dark, Walter sat in his kitchen with the curtains drawn, on encrypted phone calls with Eleanor Vance and a Seattle attorney named Vivian Cross. Vivian Cross was 45 years old, black-tailored suits, hair pulled back into a severe bun, a voice like ice cracking on a Montana lake. She did not waste a single word. She told Walter everything he needed to know in clean, sharp, unforgiving sentences. The deal she could broker would be the largest private rare earth lease in American history. The signing bonus would be $8 million. The royalty stream would be 12% of all extracted material. But, the Ashfords would try to stop it. The Ashfords would try to seize the land. The Ashfords would try every dirty trick they had ever learned in 3 generations of corruption. And Walter Hadley had to be ready. He was. He thought he was. Until the day Delphine came home unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Walter was in the kitchen reading through a draft contract Vivian had emailed him. He heard a car door slam in the driveway. He heard footsteps on the porch. The screen door flew open. Delphine stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, a manila envelope in her hand. "Daddy." Walter stood up, knocked his chair over. "Sweetheart, what is it? What's wrong?" She held up the envelope. Her voice was shaking. "My teaching position. The school district. They terminated my contract this morning. Effective immediately." "What?" "They said it was. Budget cuts?" They said my 3rd grade class was being merged with another." "That's not." "It's not true, Daddy. I called my supervisor. I begged her to tell me the truth. She cried, Daddy. She cried on the phone." "What did she say?" "She said the Ashford Family Foundation pulled its annual donation, $300,000. The school board got a letter. The letter said the foundation would withdraw all future support if Delphine Hadley remained employed by the district. Walter felt the floor tilt. They went after you. They went after me, Daddy. They went after my baby. He crossed the kitchen. He pulled his daughter into his arms. He held her. She sobbed into his flannel shirt. 24 years old, a school teacher, a woman who had never harmed a soul in her life, punished for the sin of being a Hadley. Walter's vision went red at the edges, because this was a line. This was a line that had never, ever been crossed. The Ashfords had broken his grandfather. The Ashfords had broken his father. The Ashfords had made him a tenant on his own family's stolen land. But they had never touched his daughter. Until now. He held her by the shoulders, looked into her brown eyes. Delphine. Daddy, I need to tell you something. What? I need to tell you the truth. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, sniffed, tried to be brave. Tell me. So he did. Everything. The samples. Eleanor Vance. The rare earth deposit. The $30 million. The Seattle attorney. The Department of Energy filing that was being prepared in secret. He told her all of it, in a quiet, calm voice that did not match the storm inside his chest. When he finished, Delphine sat down at the kitchen table. She did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, Daddy, yeah, they took my job because they're scared of you. Yes. They don't even know what's under there yet. No, they just suspect. And when they find out, they'll come harder. She nodded slowly. She put both hands flat on the table, the way Eleanor Vance had, the way her mother used to. She looked up, and in that moment, Walter saw Margaret in his daughter's face, not the way Margaret looked, the way Margaret was. Quiet strength, iron underneath. Daddy? Yes, baby. Mum would say we don't run. Mum would. So we don't run? No. And I'm not going back to Riverton. Sweetheart, I'm staying here, with you, until this is finished. Delphine? Don't argue with me. I am Margaret Rose Hadley's daughter, and I am not running away from a fight. Walter looked at his 24-year-old child, his baby, the little girl he had held in his arms the day she was born, and he saw a woman who was about to walk into a war. He kissed her on the forehead. Okay, baby. Okay. That night, after Delphine had gone upstairs to her old bedroom, Walter sat alone in the kitchen. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 11. He felt a strange weight on his chest. He picked up the phone. He called Eleanor Vance. Walter, Eleanor, they came after my daughter. Oh no. They had her fired. The school board, the Ashford Foundation. A long pause on the line. Walter. Yes. It's starting. Yes. How fast can Vivian close the lease? 3 weeks, maybe 4. Tell her to make it 2. But the storm was already moving. And the next blow did not come from Trenton Ashford or from Cornelius Ashford. It came from a place Walter Hadley would never have predicted. It came from Ruth Coleman. Ruth called Walter at 6:30 on a Thursday morning. Her voice was low, tight. Walter. Ruth, what is it? I need you to come down to the courthouse. Right now. Use the back entrance. Ruth? Don't ask questions. Just come. He went. She met him in the basement archive room. The lights were dim. The smell of old paper hung in the air. She had a banker's box on the table in front of her. The box was covered in dust. The label on the side, in faded ink, read, Tract 88, Eastern Sector, original acquisition file. She did not speak. She just opened the lid. She pulled out a folder. She handed it to Walter. He opened the folder. Inside, a geological survey, dated 1962, commissioned by Hollis Ashford, his great-grandfather's enemy, Cornelius Ashford's father, the patriarch who had built the empire. The survey was 63 years old. It was stamped on the front in red. Confidential. Ashford Holdings, LLC. Walter began to read. His hands began to shake, because what he read was a complete chemical and mineralogical analysis of Bone Hollow, done by a Denver geological firm. In 1962, the conclusion of the report, in bold print on the final page, said, recommend long-term holding. Surface composition consistent with high-grade alkaline, rare earth precipitates. Subsurface aquifer likely contains commercially significant concentrations of neodymium and dysprosium. Recommend purchase of all adjacent parcels. Recommend public concealment of geological findings to preserve future acquisition price. Walter could not breathe. He looked up at Ruth. She was crying, silent tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. Ruth? Walter. They knew. They've always known. 60 years. 60 years, Walter. They've been sitting on it, waiting for the technology to catch up, waiting for the market to be ready. Hollis Ashford knew. And he told his son, Edmund Ashford knew. And Cornelius. Cornelius knows Walter. But Trenton has no idea. That little fool thought he was selling you dirt. Walter sat down on the cold concrete floor of the archive basement. He put his hands on his head. His grandfather had known. His father had known. But the Ashfords had known too. For 3 generations. The Hadleys and the Ashfords had been circling the same secret, from opposite sides, for 6 decades. His grandfather Theodore had been forced to sell Bone Hollow for next to nothing in 1962, and Hollis Ashford had known, the whole time, what he was buying. He had stolen a fortune from a poor farmer who couldn't read a geological survey. He had bought the future of his family's empire for pennies, and his great-grandson Trenton had just signed it all back away. Because arrogance has a half-life, and after 3 generations, even the strongest poison wears off. Walter stood up, wiped his eyes, looked at Ruth. How did you find this? Cornelius came in last week. He pulled the file. He had it brought to his office. I watched on the security cameras. He sat with it for an hour. Then he had it returned. But he didn't have it returned to the right shelf. Where did he put it? In the wrong drawer, on purpose, where someone would never look, unless they knew what they were looking for. And you knew. I've been at this desk for 41 years, Walter. I know every drawer in this building. She closed the folder, pressed it into his hands. Take it, hide it, show it to your attorney. Show it to Eleanor Vance. Ruth? Yes. Why are you doing this? She looked at him for a long time. She wiped her cheek. She said softly, because in 1968, when I was 11 years old, my father lost his farm to Hollis Ashford. We had to move into a rented trailer at the edge of town. My mother cried herself to sleep every night for 2 years. Ruth, I have waited a long time for this, Walter. A long time. So you take that folder, and you put those people on their knees. She turned away, walked toward the stairs, stopped halfway up, turned back. And tell Margaret, when you see her again, tell her Ruth Coleman finally did something brave. She climbed the stairs. Walter stood alone in the basement, holding the secret his family had been chasing for 6 decades. That night was the longest night of Walter Hadley's life. He did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the geological survey in front of him. Delphine sat across from him, reading every page, slowly, carefully. When she was finished, she set the folder down. She looked at her father. She said one sentence. "Daddy, this changes everything." "I know." "Granddaddy didn't just get cheated. He got robbed in cold blood." "I know. And now they're going to come for us. They're going to come hard." She was right. 2 nights later, a knock at the door. 10:37 p.m. Walter looked through the curtain. A black town car was parked in his driveway, idling, the headlights off. He opened the door. Cornelius Ashford stood on his porch. 72 years old, a tailored gray suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, as if he had been pulled away from a quiet evening. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His eyes were tired. He carried no briefcase, no documents. He carried nothing at all. He just stood there, and he said, "Walter, may I come in?" Walter looked at him for a long moment, his mind racing. Vivian had told him, "Do not let any Ashford into your home. Do not speak to any Ashford without an attorney present. Do not, do not, do not." But Cornelius Ashford was not Trenton. Cornelius was something different. The old man's eyes were not the eyes of a predator. They were the eyes of a man who had lost something he could not get back. Walter opened the door wider. "Come in, Mr. Ashford." Cornelius stepped inside, removed his coat, hung it on the back of a kitchen chair, sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. He did not look at the geological survey, even though it was right there in the middle of the table. He looked at Walter. Walter sat across from him. Delphine was upstairs. She did not come down, but Walter knew she was at the top of the stairs, listening. Cornelius spoke first. "My wife died 5 years ago, Walter." Walter blinked. That was not what he had expected. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Beatrice Ashford. We were married for 46 years." "I'm sorry." "She was the only person on this earth who ever told me the truth about myself." Walter said nothing. Cornelius continued. "In the final week of her life, when she could no longer eat, when she could barely speak, she held my hand and she told me she had one last request." He paused. His old hand tightened on the table. "She told me to give the Bone Hollow tract back to the Hadley family." Walter's chest went still. "She said that." "She said exactly that. She said, Cornelius, you can keep everything else, but you give those acres back to the people you stole them from. You do it before I'm gone. You do it while I can still see you do it." And you didn't. And I didn't, Walter. I told my wife on her deathbed that I would. And I didn't. The kitchen was silent. Walter could hear his own breathing. He could hear the floorboard creak upstairs as Delphine shifted her weight. He could hear the breath leaving Cornelius Ashford's old chest. "Why are you here, Cornelius?" "Because I am dying, Walter. Dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 3 to 6 months, maybe less." Walter did not know what to say. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me, son. I have not earned anyone's sorrow. I have lived a long, wealthy, cruel life. I have hurt many people. I have stolen many things. I have stood by while my father and my grandfather did the same. I have nothing to complain about." He paused. He looked down at his hands. "But I would like to make a deal with you, Walter Hadley, before I die." What kind of deal? I will give you $100,000 cash tonight for Bone Hollow. Walter shook his head slowly. Mr. Ashford, I'm not finished. I will also forgive every farm loan held by the Ashford Bank in Cedar Hollow County. Every single one. 47 families. I will tear up the paper tomorrow morning. Walter's heart stopped. 47 families. 47 mortgages. 47 farms saved. That was every neighbor he had ever known. That was Silas Doyle's brother. That was Ruth Coleman's nephew. That was the widow Patricia Hammond who ran the diner, 47 families. But Walter sat there, and he thought, because the offer was generous on the surface. But the offer was not the rescue Cornelius pretended. The land was worth $30 million, maybe more. $100,000 and 47 mortgages was a fraction of what could be done if Walter held the land. He could pay off the same mortgages himself. He could save the same families. He could build a foundation in Margaret's name that would do more for Cedar Hollow than the Ashfords had done in 3 generations. But there was something else. Cornelius was dying. Cornelius was trying to make amends before his death. And Walter could see in the old man's eyes that the request was sincere. And there was a third thing. A thing Walter could not say out loud. A thing Walter could not even admit to himself yet. Cornelius was offering a path that would let Walter walk away clean, with no public fight, no courtroom, no risk to his daughter. If he said yes, Delphine was safe. If he said no, the Ashford machine, with or without Cornelius, would come for them harder. Walter took a long breath. He said softly, Mr. Ashford, yes, I know what's under Bone Hollow. The old man's eyes flickered, just for a moment. Then they settled. I assumed you did. And I know that your family has known for 60 years. A pause. A very long pause. Yes, Walter. And I know what your father did to my grandfather Theodore in 1962. The old man closed his eyes. Yes. So I cannot sell it back to you for $100,000, Mr. Ashford, because that money is not yours to give. That money belongs to my grandfather, and my father, and every family in this town that your family has bled for 90 years. Cornelius opened his eyes. He looked at Walter, a long, steady, defeated look. He nodded once. I understand. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Walter. He stood up slowly. His knees made a sound like dry sticks breaking. He pulled on his coat. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. He turned. Walter? Yes. I want you to know something. Yes, my son Trenton. He does not know I am sick. He does not know I came here tonight. He does not know what is under that land. He thinks he won a cruel little game last month at the courthouse. I know. He is going to do something terrible to you in the next 2 weeks, Walter. He is going to try to use the county council to seize the land back. He has already begun making the calls. I figured. I cannot stop him. He no longer listens to me. He has not listened to me in 5 years. I understand. Cornelius paused. But I can tell you what he is planning. So you can be ready. Walter blinked. Why would you do that? The old man smiled. A small, tired, sad smile. Because my wife is watching Walter, and I have one chance left to make her proud. He opened the door. He stepped out into the night. The black town car door closed behind him with a soft click. The taillights faded down the gravel drive. Walter stood at the open door, the cold mountain air rolling over his bare feet. He whispered, "Maggie, what just happened?" The wind chimes on the porch tinkled softly. He closed his eyes and held that sound in his chest like a prayer. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy served Walter with a manila envelope at the feed store. He opened it in the parking lot, his pickup truck idling, Delphine in the passenger seat. The county council had called an emergency session. The agenda: Ordinance 104, immediate seizure and condemnation of Tract 88, Eastern Sector, Cedar Hollow Township. Reason cited: severe environmental hazard, toxic alkaline contamination, threat to county groundwater, compensation offered, $2,000 for 72 acres of land valued at over $30 million. The hearing was set for Thursday evening, 7 p.m. Cedar Hollow County Courthouse, main hearing chamber. Walter looked at Delphine. Delphine looked at Walter. Walter pulled his phone out of his pocket. He dialed Vivian Cross in Seattle. The line connected on the second ring. She did not say hello. She said, "What did they do?" "They're trying to seize it. Thursday night, environmental hazard claim, $2,000 buyout." A pause. A very, very cold pause. "Walter." "Yes." "Get Delphine somewhere safe. Get Eleanor on a plane. I will be in Cedar Hollow by Wednesday afternoon with an emergency federal motion ready to file." "And Walter?" "Yes." "Tell them nothing." The line went dead. That night, the Hadley house was quiet. Delphine had gone to bed early. Exhausted? Walter sat alone at the kitchen table, the geological survey in front of him, his father's letter beside it, a glass of cold coffee gone untouched. He picked up the framed photograph of Margaret, the one from their wedding day. She was 23 years old. She was laughing at something his cousin had said. The light was caught in her dark hair. He held the picture to his chest. He whispered to her, the way he whispered to her every night. "Maggie, they're coming. I'm scared. I don't know if I can do this." He paused, and in the silence of the dark kitchen, he could almost hear her, the way he had heard her every night for 8 years, the way he chose to believe was real. She said, "You don't have to do it alone, Walter. You never did." He closed his eyes. He held the photograph, and he prepared himself for war. Because Thursday was coming, the Ashfords were coming, the courtroom was coming, the whole town was coming, and Walter Hadley, 50 years old, widower, father, son of Joseph, grandson of Theodore, was about to walk into the fight of his life. Wednesday afternoon, the day before the hearing, a black SUV with Washington state plates rolled into Cedar Hollow at 3:17 p.m. It pulled up in front of the Hadley house. The door opened. Vivian Cross stepped out. 45 years old, a charcoal pantsuit that fit like it had been stitched onto her body. Black heels, a leather briefcase that cost more than Walter's pickup truck. Hair pulled back so tight it looked painted on. She did not smile. She did not wave. She walked up the porch steps, the way generals walk into battlefields. Walter opened the screen door. She looked at him. "Walter Hadley." "Yes, ma'am." "We have 18 hours. Let's get to work." She did not eat dinner. She did not accept the coffee Delphine offered her. She set up a temporary war room on the kitchen table. 3 laptops, a satellite phone, 2 encrypted thumb drives, a printout of every property deed registered to the Ashford family in the last 40 years, a bound copy of the United States Department of Energy Strategic Materials Act, a draft federal complaint ready to file, sitting in a manila folder, waiting to be served. Delphine watched her from the doorway, 24 years old, trying not to look afraid. Vivian noticed. Vivian looked up, for 1 second, just one. The mask cracked. "You're Delphine." "Yes, ma'am." "Your father told me about you." "He did." "He told me you sold your engagement ring to buy him seed money." Delphine's face flushed. "Daddy wasn't supposed to." "He didn't. He didn't tell me how he found out. He just told me what you did." Vivian closed her laptop. She walked across the kitchen. She stopped in front of Delphine. She was a head taller than the young woman. She looked down into Delphine's brown eyes. "Sweetheart." "Yes, ma'am. I have spent 20 years putting men like the Ashfords on their knees. 20 years. And in all that time, I have never once heard of a daughter doing what you did for your father." Delphine's eyes filled. Tomorrow night, when you sit in that courtroom, I want you to remember something." "Yes, ma'am." "Your mother is watching." A pause. "And your mother is proud." Delphine sobbed. Once. Just once. A small, sharp, broken sound. Vivian held her by the shoulders for 1 moment. Then she stepped back. The mask returned. "Let's get to work." Ruth Coleman arrived at 6 p.m. She carried a casserole dish. She also carried a wooden box. The box was old, dark walnut, brass corners worn to the brass. She set it on the kitchen table. She did not speak. She placed her hand on the lid. Walter looked up at her. "Ruth?" "Walter? What is this?" She did not answer. She opened the lid. Inside, a stack of envelopes, tied with a red ribbon. The handwriting on the envelopes was Margaret's. Walter's heart stopped. He recognized it instantly. The slant of her letters, the loop on her capital M, the little flourish on the bottom of her Y's. Margaret had written these. Ruth sat down at the table. She wiped her eyes with a corner of her apron. She said, "Margaret wrote me letters, Walter." "When?" "In the last 3 months of her life, when the cancer had taken her voice, when she could not speak anymore. She wrote me letters every day, from her hospital bed, while you were down in the cafeteria getting coffee." Walter could not breathe. "What do they say?" "They say everything, Walter. They say everything she needed to tell you. She made me promise to give them to you, but only when you needed her most." She paused. "Tonight is that night." She slid the box across the table, stood up, kissed Walter on the forehead. "Read them. Tonight. Whatever happens tomorrow, she'll be in the courtroom with you." She walked to the door, stopped, turned back. "Walter Hadley." "Yes. She loved you so much, honey. She loved you so much it could have lit up the whole valley." The screen door closed. Ruth was gone. Walter sat at the kitchen table. He untied the red ribbon. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely loosen the knot. The first envelope was on top, dated 3 weeks before Margaret died. He opened it. He unfolded the paper. He read, "My Walter, if Ruth has given you this letter, then I am gone, and you are facing something terrible. I am writing this from room 304. The window faces east. The sun is rising over the mountains. I am thinking of you driving home in the morning to feed the chickens. I want to tell you something. I have known for a long time, since before we married, that the Hadley name carried a weight in this town. Your father told me about your grandfather, Theodore, the week we got engaged. He told me about Bone Hollow. He told me what was stolen from your family in 1962. I knew. Walter, and I never told you. Because I wanted you to find it yourself. I wanted you to be the one who put it right. And one more thing, the most important thing. The thing I need you to remember when this gets hard. The Ashfords are not your enemies. They are people. Broken people. Frightened people. People who learned cruelty from their fathers and never learned how to stop. If you fight them with hate, Walter, you will become them. And I cannot bear the thought of that. You will know what to do when the moment comes. You always have. Be brave. Be kind. Be the man I married. And kiss our daughter for me. Every single day. For the rest of your life. I am with you. Always. Maggie. Walter put the letter down. He bowed his head. He wept. For a very long time. Delphine came down the stairs. She did not say a word. She sat next to her father. She read the letter over his shoulder. She wept too, and in the kitchen where Margaret had once made pancakes on Sunday mornings. Father and daughter held each other, while outside, the Montana stars came out, one by one. Thursday morning, the day of the hearing. Walter woke up at 4 a.m. He could not sleep. He drove out to Bone Hollow, alone. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, pink and purple over the limestone ridges. The white earth glowing soft in the pre-dawn. He walked out to the center of the dead field. He stood there. He spoke aloud, to his grandfather, to his father, to Margaret, to the 72 acres of cracked white dirt his family had been waiting on for 3 generations. I'm ready, he whispered. The wind whispered back. He drove home. The Cedar Hollow County Courthouse filled up an hour before the hearing began. Every seat taken, every wall lined with bodies. Standing room only in the back. The fire marshal looked the other way. This was history. This was the night Walter Hadley either lost everything or shattered a 100-year empire. The farmers were there, the ones whose mortgages were held by the Ashford Bank, the ones who had laughed at Walter for buying Bone Hollow, the ones who had stopped speaking to him at the diner. They came in their work boots and their Sunday flannels, with their wives, with their sons and daughters. They sat in silence. They watched. Silas Doyle was there, in a clean shirt, hair combed for the first time in a month. Patricia Hammond was there, widow, owner of the Cedar Hollow Diner. Pastor Brennan was there, in his clerical collar, hymnal in his hands. Ruth Coleman was there, in a Sunday dress and pearls, sitting in the 3rd row. Eleanor Vance was there, just arrived from Fort Collins, tired eyes, determined jaw, and Walter Hadley was there, in his only blue suit, the one Margaret had bought him for her brother's funeral in 2012. The pants were a little tight in the waist. The jacket fit perfectly. Delphine sat beside him, holding his hand. She wore Margaret's pearls, the ones she had inherited the day after the funeral. She had never worn them before. Tonight she wore them, for her mother. The Ashfords sat in the front row. Trenton Ashford, black suit, Italian shoes, phone in his hand, texting his lawyer, smug, confident, believing this was about to be over in 30 minutes, believing the Hadley fool was about to be crushed, believing the family empire was about to absorb yet another small inconvenience. Beside him, Cornelius Ashford, 72 years old, grey suit, pale, thinner than he had been 2 weeks ago. The cancer was visible now. He sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. He did not look at his son. He did not look at the gallery. He looked at one person and one person only, Walter Hadley, a long, steady, resigned look. Walter met his eyes once, Just once. He nodded. Cornelius nodded back. A small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of 3 generations. Mayor Tobias Buckman pounded his gavel. The room fell silent. This emergency session of the Cedar Hollow County Council is hereby called to order. We are here tonight to vote on Ordinance 104, the immediate condemnation and seizure of Tract 88, known locally as Bone Hollow, due to severe environmental hazard and the threat of groundwater contamination. He looked down at his papers. The county is prepared to compensate the current owner, Mr. Walter Hadley, in the amount of $2,000 for the burden of immediate forfeiture. Walter did not move. Delphine squeezed his hand harder. The mayor continued, Mr. Hadley, do you have any defense to present before the council votes? Walter stood up slowly. The whole room watched. He buttoned the top button of his blue suit jacket. He cleared his throat. He said softly, Mayor Buckman. Yes, I do not have a defense. A gasp from the gallery. Trenton Ashford smiled. The mayor raised his gavel. In that case, I'll move directly to a vote. But, Walter raised one finger. My attorney does. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Vivian Cross walked in, 2 paralegals behind her, each carrying a banker's box. She walked down the center aisle, the clack of her heels on the wooden floor, the only sound in the room. She stopped at the partition. She did not address the mayor. She did not look at the council. She turned and faced Trenton Ashford. She smiled. A cold, precise, predatory smile. She said, My name is Vivian Cross, Senior Counsel for Apex Strategic Minerals. I am here to inform this council that a vote on Ordinance 104 will trigger immediate federal litigation. Mayor Buckman blinked. Federal. Yes, Mayor. On what grounds? She turned to him. She slid a thick bound document across the council's desk. On the grounds that as of 9 a.m. this morning, Eastern Standard Time, Tract 88 has been officially designated as a critical mineral resource site under the Federal Defense Production Act. The room exploded with whispers. The mayor banged his gavel. Order! Order in this chamber! Vivian continued. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Apex Strategic Minerals has secured an exclusive 50-year extraction lease with the sole owner of the land, Mr. Walter Joseph Hadley. The first installment of his signing bonus, $8 million, has cleared his account as of 2:15 p.m. this afternoon. The whispers became shouts. The mayor banged his gavel again. Trenton Ashford stood up. His face had gone white. His phone slipped from his hand, clattered to the wooden floor. He did not pick it up. Lithium. A farmer in the back row shouted it. It's lithium, isn't it? Vivian turned to face the gallery. No, sir, it is not lithium. It is something more valuable. She paused. She looked around the room, every single person leaning forward. It is rare earth elements. Neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, the most strategically critical metals in modern manufacturing, used in electric vehicle motors, wind turbines, smartphones, stealth aircraft, missile guidance systems. She paused again, and the vast majority of the global supply currently comes from outside the United States. A murmur from the gallery. The deposit under Bone Hollow is estimated at $32 million in raw asset value. Long-term refined output is projected at over $400 million. The gallery erupted. Mayor Buckman could not bring order to the room. He banged his gavel. He banged it again. He banged it a third time. Eventually the room quieted, but only because everyone wanted to hear what came next. Trenton Ashford finally found his voice. The mineral rights. He was shouting. The mineral rights were severed. My family has owned that land for 63 years. The mineral rights belong to us. Vivian Cross turned to him, slowly. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a single laminated sheet of paper. She held it up so the council could see it, so the gallery could see it, so Trenton Ashford could see it, so every farmer in Cedar Hollow County could see what their futures were about to look like. This is the deed of sale, executed last month by Mr. Trenton Ashford, personally, at this very courthouse, notarized by Mrs. Ruth Coleman. Ruth raised her hand from the third row. Vivian acknowledged her with a small nod. This is a standard fee simple deed, the same form used by Cedar Hollow County for routine property transfers since 1978. She began to read, slowly, each word landing like a hammer blow. Conveys all rights, title, and interest, including all surface, subsurface, and mineral rights, to the grantee. She lowered the paper. She looked at Trenton. Your son, Mr. Ashford. Sir, your son sold us a $32 million mineral fortune for $3,600 because he did not bring a lawyer to the closing, because he was too busy laughing at a 50-year-old widower to read the contract he was signing. Silence. Absolute. Total. Crushing silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Trenton Ashford sat down. He did not say a word. His head dropped into his hands. His shoulders began to shake. The proudest man in Cedar Hollow, reduced to silent weeping, in front of 300 people, in the building where his family had ruled for 90 years. But the night was not over yet. Cornelius Ashford stood up, slowly, painfully, his old knees popping. He did not look at his son. He turned and addressed the council. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. Mayor Buckman. Yes, Cornelius. I would like to make a statement for the record. Of course. The old man walked to the front of the room. He stopped at the partition. He turned to face the gallery. He looked at the farmers, the widows, the sons and daughters of every family his family had bled for 3 generations. He breathed in. He breathed out. And he said the words that no Ashford had ever said in Cedar Hollow County. I am sorry. The room did not breathe. He continued, my family has known about the rare earth deposit under Bone Hollow since 1962. My father, Hollis Ashford, commissioned a geological survey that year. He concealed the findings. He pressured Theodore Hadley to sell the tract for next to nothing. He intentionally defrauded the Hadley family of a fortune. A gasp. A long, collective, stunned. Inhale, my family has done this. To many families. Over the last 90 years. We have foreclosed on loans we should have forgiven. We have raised rents that should have been lowered. We have driven good men and good women off land that should have remained theirs. He paused. His hands were trembling now, but his voice was steady. I am dying. The doctors give me 3 to 6 months, and I do not want to die having spent a single one of those months continuing the work my father started. He turned to Walter. Mr. Hadley? Mr. Ashford? I will not contest the lease. I will not challenge the deed. I will not raise a finger against you in any court anywhere in this country. Thank you. I will also voluntarily dissolve the Ashford Family Foundation, effective immediately. All of its assets, approximately $17 million, will be transferred to whatever charitable trust you choose to establish. A wave of gasps. And I will return your daughter's teaching position to her by Monday morning. Delphine's hand flew to her mouth. She made a small sound, a child's sound, the sound of a young woman who had been told she could come home. Walter Hadley stood up, slowly. The whole room turned to look at him. He was not a tall man. He was not a powerful man. He was a 50-year-old farmer in a wedding funeral suit. But in that moment, in that one moment, he was the most powerful man in the entire state of Montana. He could destroy, or he could heal. He could shatter, or he could mend. He could take everything, or he could give everything. He thought of his grandfather Theodore. He thought of his father Joseph. He thought of Margaret, in her hospital bed, writing letters to Ruth Coleman by candlelight. He heard her voice in his memory. If you fight them with hate, you will become them. He took a breath. He looked at Cornelius Ashford. He spoke. Mr. Ashford. Yes, Walter. I accept your apology. The room exhaled. And I am not going to take the $17 million from the Ashford Foundation. A murmur of confusion. I am going to ask you to keep your foundation alive. And I am going to ask you to put your son Trenton in charge of it. Trenton looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears, his eyes wide with shock. And I am going to ask the Ashford Foundation to merge with a new foundation I will be establishing this week, funded by the proceeds of my lease with Apex Strategic Minerals. The new foundation will be called. He paused. His voice broke. The Margaret Rose Hadley Foundation. Delphine sobbed once. The crowd stayed silent. Walter continued. The Margaret Hadley Foundation will forgive every predatory loan held by the Ashford Bank in Cedar Hollow County. All 47 of them. The mortgages will be cleared. The land will go back to the families. A farmer in the back row stood up. Then another. Then another. Walter continued. The foundation will provide scholarship money to every child in this county who wants to go to college and cannot afford it. The foundation will rebuild the elementary school in Riverton where my daughter teaches. The foundation will pay for the new wing at the county hospital where my wife died. He paused. He looked at Trenton Ashford. And the foundation will require its board of directors to include one member of the Ashford family, working alongside one member of the Hadley family for the next 50 years. He paused, because Margaret would want it that way. She would want the two families that broke this town to be the two families that put it back together. The courthouse was silent for a long time. A very long time. Then a sound, a small one at first, Pastor Brennan in the third row, beginning to clap, slow, then Ruth Coleman, then Patricia Hammond, then Silas Doyle, then every single soul in the room. A standing ovation, a roar of applause, the kind of applause that shakes old marble, the kind of applause that has been buried in the chest of a small town for 90 years. The kind of applause that does not just celebrate a victory, it celebrates a healing. Cornelius Ashford crossed the room, walked up to Walter. He was crying openly now. The old man, the patriarch, the empire, reduced to tears in the middle of his own courthouse. He took Walter's hand in both of his. His grip was weak, but it was sincere. He whispered, so quietly that only Walter could hear. "Beatrice was right about you." "Sir?" "My wife. She told me once, years ago, that she had heard about a farmer in this town who refused to bend the knee. She said if I ever met that man face to face, I would see the future of this town in his eyes." He paused. "She was right." Walter's eyes filled. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford." "Thank you, Walter." Trenton stood up. He walked toward his father, slowly, hesitantly, like a child approaching a stranger. Cornelius turned to look at him. There was no anger in the old man's face. There was only sorrow, the sorrow of a father who had failed to raise his son. Trenton stood in front of him. He looked at the floor. His shoulders shook. He whispered something. Walter could not hear what, but Cornelius did. The old man reached out, and for what was likely the first time in 20 years, he pulled his son into his arms. He held him. In the middle of the courtroom, in front of the whole town, he held him. And Trenton wept against his father's chest, the way little boys weep when they are finally allowed to be small again. Outside the courthouse, the Montana stars came out, one by one. The farmers spilled into the parking lot. The whispers became conversations. The conversations became laughter. The laughter became something almost like joy. Walter stood on the courthouse steps with Delphine. She had not let go of his hand all night. She did not let go now. Vivian Cross approached them. She had her briefcase in one hand. Her face had softened, just a little. "Walter." "Vivian, in 20 years of practicing law, I have never seen a courtroom moment like the one you just delivered. Thank you. You could have taken everything." "I know. Why didn't you?" Walter looked up at the stars, the same stars Margaret had loved, the same stars she used to point at from the porch swing on summer nights. He said softly, "Because if I had taken everything, I would have become them. And my wife would never have forgiven me." Vivian Cross, the hardest woman in the Pacific Northwest, wiped her eye with the back of her hand. She did not say another word. She just walked to her car, and she drove east into the night. 2 years passed. 2 summers came and went in the Cedar Hollow Valley. 2 autumns turned the cottonwoods gold. 2 winters covered the limestone ridges with snow. And in those 2 years, everything changed. Apex Strategic Minerals broke ground on the Bone Hollow extraction facility in the spring after the hearing. State-of-the-art, closed-loop, environmentally certified. The construction phase brought 420 new jobs to Cedar Hollow. Welders, pipe fitters, electricians, engineers, truck drivers, cooks, hotel staff. By the second year, 280 permanent positions were filled at the facility. The average wage was $32 an hour. For people who had been making $12, the Margaret Hadley Foundation became the largest charitable organization in the state of Montana by the end of the first year. Every single one of the 47 Ashford Bank mortgages had been forgiven. 47 families, 47 farms, 47 legacies restored. Patricia Hammond owned her diner outright for the first time in 26 years. Silas Doyle's brother got his family ranch back. Ruth Coleman's nephew finally inherited his father's land. The foundation funded a new wing at the Cedar Hollow Community Hospital, the wing where Margaret had died. It was named the Margaret Rose Hadley Memorial Wing. The foundation funded a brand new elementary school in Riverton. Delphine Hadley was made principal. She was 26 years old, the youngest principal in the history of the state. Cornelius Ashford lived 9 months after the hearing, longer than his doctors had predicted. The cancer took him on a Tuesday morning in late June. Walter sat with him at the end. He held the old man's hand. He read to him from the Bible. He sang, quietly, a Patsy Cline song Margaret had loved. Cornelius's last words were not for his son. They were for his wife. He whispered, "Beatrice, I tried, my love. In the end, I tried." And then he was gone. His funeral was held at First Methodist Church. Pastor Brennan officiated. Walter Hadley delivered the eulogy. A Hadley, speaking at the funeral of an Ashford, in the same town where their families had been at war for 90 years. The town watched. The town wept. The town began to heal. Trenton Ashford was not the same man after his father's death. The arrogant young heir, the Range Rover, the Italian shoes, the cufflinks, all of it was gone. It did not happen overnight. It took the better part of 2 years. There were bad days. There were relapses. There was a night 6 months after the hearing when Trenton sat at a bar in Bozeman drinking himself toward the same kind of cruel man he had always been. Pastor Brennan drove 4 hours to bring him home, sat with him in silence in the truck, brought him to the foundation office at sunrise, and told him, "Son, the work is the only thing that will save you." Trenton went to work, 6 days a week, for a salary of $45,000 a year. He drove a used Toyota. He lived in a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. He oversaw the foundation's scholarship program. In the second year, he personally interviewed 312 high school seniors from rural Montana families, 312, the same number as the Sundays Walter had visited Margaret's grave. The coincidence was not lost on anyone. Trenton did not speak much, but when he did, he spoke kindly, and once a week. He took the bus to Cedar Hollow Cemetery. He visited 2 graves, his father's and Margaret Rose Hadley's. He left flowers on both. Ruth Coleman retired from the county clerk's office on her 70th birthday. The Margaret Hadley Foundation gave her a pension. She bought a small house with a porch swing. She tended a garden full of yellow daisies. She read paperback novels in the evenings. She was happy. She had earned it. Eleanor Vance came to Cedar Hollow for the dedication of the Bone Hollow facility. She and Walter stood together on the new observation deck, watched the extraction trucks roll out across the white earth. She turned to him. "Walter, Eleanor, my husband would have loved this. Margaret would have loved it too. They would have liked each other, I think. They would have." She paused. "I'm glad we both made it through, Walter." "Me too. 2 old friends, 2 widowed hearts, standing together, watching a future they had built out of dust." Silas Doyle and Walter went fishing every Saturday morning, the way they had when they were boys. They did not talk much. They did not need to. They just fished. And sometimes Silas would say things like, "You did good, brother." And Walter would say, "I had help, brother." And that was enough. On the 2nd anniversary of the hearing, a warm October evening, the sun setting low and gold over the valley, Walter Hadley took his daughter out to Bone Hollow. Just the 2 of them. He parked the pickup at the edge of the field. They walked together, out across the white earth, to a place Walter had marked with a small wooden cross. It was the spot where he had knelt the day he bought the land, the spot where he had whispered to his grandfather, the spot where he had felt Margaret's hand on his shoulder for the first time in 8 years. They stood there. The wind rustled across the limestone ridges. The extraction facility hummed quietly in the distance. The Montana sky turned pink and gold and rose. Delphine spoke first. "Daddy." "Yes, baby." "Do you regret any of it?" Walter thought for a long time. He looked out across the land his family had been chasing for 3 generations. He looked at his daughter, his baby, wearing her mother's pearls, 26 years old now, a principal of a school her father had built. He shook his head slowly. "No, sweetheart, I don't regret any of it. Even the years of working tenant fields. Especially those years. Why? Because those years made me ready to do this, to not become them, to not let the anger win." He paused. He took her hand. "Land is not for owning, Delphine. Land is for keeping, for the ones who come after us." She squeezed his hand. "Mom would be so proud." "She is baby, she is." The wind rose. The white dust danced around their boots. The last of the sunlight caught in Margaret's pearls. And for one moment, one quiet, sacred, holy moment, Walter Hadley felt his wife standing on the other side of him, her hand on his shoulder, her breath in his ear, her voice in his heart, saying, "You did it, my love. You did it." He closed his eyes. He whispered back, "We did it, Maggie. We did it together." The wind quieted. The stars came out. Father and daughter walked back to the pickup truck. They drove home. The kitchen light was on. Through the window, a clay pot of yellow daisies, sitting where Margaret had always kept them, still blooming, still glowing, still loved, the way the truly cherished things in this life always are. For the ones who waited, for the ones who believed, for the ones who held on through the long dark winters, for the wives at the kitchen window, for the husbands at the cemetery gate, for every soul who ever lost something precious and found something even greater on the other side of the grief. That is the story of Walter Hadley. That is the story of Bone Hollow. That is the story of $50 an acre and a love that outlasted every storm.